Hi again, everyone. I'm Ollie Matthews. This is the Narcissistic Resistance. In this resistance video, sponsored by contribution from Treasure Travel. And here's her story. Hi, Ollie. Since it's June, the month of Father's Day, this piece is primarily about my dad. Although my Mother's Day rant last month was dripping with hatred, my thoughts about my dad are bittersweet. Well, more bitter than sweet, but I do not hate him to the extent that I hate my mother. I think that is because he is not crazy and evil like my mom. I don't, however, wish to ever be in contact with him again. After decades of gradually lowering my contact, and now 3 years of no contact, I understand that he was never capable of ever having any real love for me. My dad's concept of a good relationship is one in which he gives nothing and the other person caters to his bad temper and needs and agrees with all of his ideas. Yeah, sounds like my father. My dad's fragile, paranoid ego interprets every little thing as a slight against him, and he has a hair trigger. Trigger him and he instantly morphs into the Incredible Hulk. My dad, like most overt narcissists, uses rage to bully and manipulate others. My dad does not know what real love is, but he has a sense of what a normal family is. And when he snaps his fingers and wants to have a fake, happy family moment, he expects everyone to fall into line regardless of whether or not he was raging the minute prior. He thinks that family members walking on eggshells around him is respect and love, when in reality, it is fear. Well, that's what the narcissist expects. The narcissist expects, like they turn their emotions on and off like a switch. They expect you to be able to do the same. They expect you, when they light you up and upset you, when they're done with you being upset, when they need you to snap. That's what they expect. Because that's what they think you have the ability to do, because that's what they have the ability to do. See, what I think about the narcissist is because they don't have any real emotion themselves, I don't think they realize other people do either. Much like how I say a person who hasn't been raised by a narcissist can't grasp the fact of not being loved. They can't grasp the concept that, no, they're not just your family and families all fight. No, they can't get it because they had love. Just like no emotion is real with a narcissist because they have no real ability to feel a real emotion, they don't realize other people can feel emotion as well. They think everything's a manipulation, so they don't even understand that emotion is real. For them, it's just a tool and a tactic to be used. So that's why your father would expect you to just to be able to turn on and off just like he does. Because you got to remember, everything about the narcissist is always projection. They're telling you what they think. They tell you what they think, whether it's in accusations or actions. He's telling you everything about himself. To be fair, I have to say he has mellowed a bit over the years, and I think that occurred after he retired and no longer had job stress raising his baseline adrenaline levels. A glaring flaw of my dad is that he has zero tolerance or compassion for anyone else's emotions. Right, because he doesn't understand them. They're not real. To the narcissist, emotions aren't real. They're a tool. They use them to manipulate. So when they see emotion, they're like, oh, you're just manipulating too. They don't understand. They fully don't understand what emotions really are. They don't understand them because they use them as weapons. Emotions are weapons to the narcissist. They're not real. They don't understand what they really are. A glaring flaw in my dad is he has zero tolerance or compassion for anyone else's emotions, which means that no one has the right to be angry around him or at him, and no one has a right to cry for any reason in his presence. Not allowing anyone else to emote is a textbook narcissist characteristic. Although he is allowed to get red with anger with steam out of his ears and fly into a rage at the drop of a pin, no one else in his family is allowed to emote because he sees emotion as a weapon only he is allowed to use. When he is emoting, he is using a weapon. So when you emote, he sees it as a weapon. He doesn't understand what emotion actually is. Although my dad is very intelligent and accomplished in his career, he had the emotional age of a 5-year-old child. Here is an example from when I was 17 that more clearly demonstrates my dad's arrested emotional maturity. There are thousands of examples. See, you're just proving, like all this about you're just proving to me he doesn't understand it. He doesn't understand emotion. It's just a weapon to him. There are thousands of examples I could give, but this one says it all. I refer to this as the ice cube incident. My dad's adult niece, Sarah, his brother's daughter, and her husband and 3 children visited us for a few days when on a road trip on their way to Idaho. Sarah's youngest child, Timmy, was a year old. Timmy was rather tired and cranky and was in his playpen in our family room. His parents were unloading their car and so were outside for 10 minutes. My dad, annoyed by Timmy's whining, took an ice cube from his soda glass and held it firmly against Timmy's baby arm until Timmy screamed in pain. I'm sure the baby was more terrorized by being grabbed by the aggressive Hulk with fiery eyes than by the ice. My sister and I did not witness this, but our dad gloated to us later with a big grin how he put Timmy in his place. A year-old child? My dad was very proud of himself for having the upper hand with the baby and said something to the effect that he sure showed that brat. Seriously? This was a guy in his 40s and the father of 3 children who was proud of himself for abusing a baby. I don't know, maybe this indicates my dad has the emotional maturity level lower than age 5. It just shows you emotion is a weapon. And you open this to say that your mother was the evil person? Torturing a baby isn't evil? Again, you usually find out that the narcissist you think wasn't the worst one actually is. That's not to take any blame off your mother, because we know she's a horrible cunt. Consistent with my dad being very harsh and cold with me and my sister and having no compassion or patience for children or babies, he was overtly mean and rude to our little friends and all the neighborhood kids in general. Our mom rarely let us have friends over, and they certainly were not allowed in the house. If any kids were playing outside with us when my dad got home, he would stand on the back porch and yell in a very mean tone, "Time to go home, get home, it's dinner time, go home." All my little friends confided in me they were afraid of my dad. One rare time, we got to have Molly for a sleepover, but only because of tragic circumstances. Her brother Sean had been hit by a car and was getting emergency surgery, and so her parents were at the hospital all night. My sister Molly and I were in sleeping bags on the back porch talking softly around 10 p.m. I think we're all about 10 to 12 years old. My dad threw open the sliding glass door and yelled, "Be quiet out there now." I think this really scared and surprised Molly. She was blessed with normal parents who always treated me and my sister so kindly when we were at their house. Couldn't my dad have faked a shred of compassion on that occasion and used a friendly tone with our friend? No. Why do you... And you're saying your father wasn't the evil one? I have to say that meanness that both of our parents displayed to our friends, neighbors, teachers, etc. was one of the many causes of constant stress that my sister and I had to bear throughout our childhood and adulthood. I'm actually feeling anxiety writing about this. My dad actually had a lot of disdain for Molly's brother Sean, Molly's brother Sean, and was frequently very mean to him. Sean was mentally disabled because he had a very invasive brain surgery for a benign tumor when he was a toddler. His brain trauma also caused him severe hormonal physical problems and pain. As a preteen, Sean would walk around the neighborhood and try to strike up conversations. He could be annoying if you were trying to get some yard work done, but he was sweet and innocent and would leave if you told him nicely that you were busy and couldn't talk. But my dad had no interest or time to be nice and no compassion for children, not even for a disabled child. Frequently, my dad yelled at Sean, sending him running and crying. How did nobody come over and whoop your father's ass? That's what I want to know. Like, how does Sean, like, how do you, like, where's Molly and Sean's father? Like, how does he not come over and just fucking beat his ass? As a kid, this was just how it was, and I assumed that was acceptable. In retrospect, however, thinking about this from an adult and parental perspective, my dad's lack of compassion for this disabled child makes me sick to my stomach. In addition to having no tolerance or fondness for children, my dad also has no respect for women. He has always treated my mom with gross disdain, even from early on in their marriage. He would constantly tell her how fat she was and complained over the stupidest things. I remember her jumping out of bed, panicked once when she was napping and she heard his car come up the driveway from work. She ran into the kitchen and grabbed several pots and pans out of the kitchen and threw them in the stove and wet her hands and tried to smooth her hair before he came up the stairs. I recall my dad having a fit at the dinner table and yelling at her because she burned the green beans. Any little mistake she made was a Greek fucking tragedy. She was certainly no dreamboat and not easy to live with, but she was always very devoted to him and would tell him how great he was, but never saw him show her any affection or ever heard him pay her a compliment. He was also hypercritical of me and my sister, as is apparent from my other letters. Additionally, he was not close to his sister and only had shitty things to say about her behind her back. Despite the fact that my dad worked at the same large company for 32 years in the town where he still resides in his retirement, as do hundreds of his work colleagues, he has no friends. I've never heard of him ever talk kindly about any former colleague, neighbor, or acquaintance, and/or ever talk about calling them or getting together. Nor did my parents have any desire to travel, visit their grandchildren, volunteer, etc. Instead, after my dad retired, he and his bitter wife have just kept to themselves and grown more and more bitter and hateful of people and life in general. Because he doesn't understand emotion. He sees these people having emotions, having lives, and all this is him reacting to a lack of understanding of what emotion actually is. He doesn't understand it. He only sees it and uses it as a weapon. Since this letter is in honor of Father's Day, I want to give some specific examples about me interacting with my dad for Father's Day. When I was 16, I made the mistake of telling my mom that I had gotten my dad a nice sweater for upcoming Father's Day because he said he needed some sweaters. She told me that was a dumb gift and that he didn't want any gifts. She always said negative things and always in a mean, angry tone. She was about to leave with my dad, so joined him in the car in the garage a couple minutes later. But after my mom got in the car and they backed down the drive, my dad drove back up the driveway, came back inside and yelled up the stairs, "I don't want any damn sweater for Father's Day." The fun thing about this was that in the 5 minutes after my mom got in the car, the front doorbell rang and it was our second cousin, Jerry. Jerry had stopped by to say hello, and the two of us were sitting in the kitchen out of sight of my dad when my dad started screaming. I smiled at Jerry and called down to Dad that he should say hi to Jerry. My dad sounded flustered as he pushed his mask back on and said hi to Jerry, and then tried to mumble something about what he really meant was that he had too many sweaters already. Clearly, my mom had intentionally angered my dad about the surprise gift I had for him. I don't know what she said, but it obviously was shitty. My mom drives wedges between family members at every opportunity, and she always tried to sabotage Father's Day, and my dad plays along every time. As Ali has pointed out in my other letters, my dad chooses to get his buttons pushed because he feeds on the negative drama just as my mother. Right, because he sees it as weapons being used. The emotions aren't real. The attachment to Father's Day, the emotional attachment of a Father's Day gift isn't real. He doesn't get it. He doesn't get it. He just sees them as opportunities to use against you, but he still doesn't, in his heart of hearts and deep in his head, he doesn't get it. He doesn't get it why anybody buys anybody anything for Father's Day or Christmas. He doesn't get it. Trust me, he doesn't get it. Because he doesn't understand real emotion, he doesn't understand love and sadness, and he doesn't understand it. All he understands is greed and self-satisfaction. That's all he gets. And all the other emotions are just tactics to use to fulfill his own self-satisfaction. I don't understand this psychology, but I do understand that my dad chooses to side with my crazy mom, no matter how absurd her lying narrative and no matter how obvious her evilness, and chooses to shit on his own kids. I have reached a point in life where I can't forgive him for this behavior. I tried to maintain a relationship with my dad over the years prior to going no contact, and so I started some special things in our relationship and tried to keep them going despite the relentless and very aggressive opposition from my mom. Again, you're trying to reach emotionally a machine, a Terminator. They have no emotion. They don't understand it. That's why it's so confusing, because they don't even understand what emotion is. They see emotion as manipulation themselves. For example, I started a tradition of calling my dad on St. Patrick's Day because that was his father's birthday. It's my father's birthday too. And I was trying to honor my dad's memory of his father. My dad usually, that'll go, why? He'd be like, why? Why? You're a sucker. My dad usually answered the phone because he anticipated my call, and we usually had a nice conversation that included some nostalgia about his father and that side of the family. My dad came to expect this annual call and having a nice chat with me without mom on the other phone extension. One strange thing about my parents is that it is rare and almost impossible to be able to talk to them individually on the phone because as they got older, their narcissism got worse. They preferred to interact with me negatively as a team. However, for a number of years, my father would answer the phone solo when I called on St. Patrick's Day. I think my mother realized that if she tried to fuck up our St. Patty's Day chat, then she would be showing disrespect for my dad's father, and that was taboo. Another tradition I started was to send 2 books for Father's Day. I would spend a lot of time researching new titles, and I would go through the New York Times bestseller list and Amazon lists, etc. My dad likes history and politics, and he appreciated these books, and frequently we would discuss them at a later date, and that was a positive relationship trend I worked hard to maintain. Right, and the only reason he maintained it was because it was something he was interested in. But he didn't appreciate the thought behind it. He didn't appreciate that you were doing research and all. He didn't appreciate it. So whenever this turns bad, I'm sure it's going to shock you because of all the emotional work you put into it. And to him, he was just, You're just fulfilling my self-satisfaction. Every year without fail, my mother would tell me I was not to get Dad anything because he does not want anything. He does not like books. She said once, she said once, and I said nonsense. She said she could not hide the fact that it bothered the shit out of her that Dad and I shared this positive interaction over Father's Day, and she was determined to crush it. I would always call on Father's Day and have a nice conversation with my dad. Unlike my mom, my dad is not crazy, and he has a nice and pleasant, and he can have nice and pleasant conversations, albeit short, as long as it's what he wants to talk about. Does he have nice and pleasant conversations about things you that he doesn't care about? Or is it only as long as you're doing what he wants? See, as long as you're doing what he wants, he'll have a nice, pleasant conversation. And it's you doing all the work for it. And your mother trying to sabotage all of it. I don't recall ever calling him on Father's Day and being mean, and him being mean and attacking me. Calling on Mother's Day, however, was always an emotional risk because you never knew if you were going to get Jekyll or Hyde. One of my grossest and unsubtle behaviors of my mom is her trying 24/7 to drive wedges between my dad and his children. His children are also her children as they remained married. My mom resented any and all bonding my dad had with any of us. Starting in junior high, my mom aggressively mounted sabotage on my dad's relationship with my younger brother, the golden child. Whenever my dad was having a nice conversation with my brother, my mom would swoop into the room and start yelling about how bad my brother had been that day and how he mouthed off to her. Frequently, she would barge into the room with the loud Hoover vacuum and disrupt their conversation. None of this was subtle, but as Ali has pointed out in many of my letters, my dad was never the innocent victim of my mom, but rather also a shitty narcissist who fed off the drama and chaos and was all too happy to let his wife ruin his kids' lives as it gave him a little break from her craziness. He knew she was hurting us and he did nothing about it when we were little kids or when we were teens. He knew she drank until she passed out every time he went on a business trip when we were toddlers and little children, and it was easier for him to look the other way. He knew my mother was a crazy, raging, dangerous lunatic when she started fights with my brother when he was a teen, and he looked the other way. More than once, she barged into my brother's room when he was a teen, threw and kicked his stuff around in a rage. She kicked thousands of dollars worth of his stereo equipment to pieces, and my dad did not side with my brother. The point is, even though my overt narcissist dad was not crazy and as dangerous as my mother, he was too goddamn selfish and uncaring to bother to care about us, to protect us from crazy. So when he was not abusing us, he was enabling her abuse. So although I tried to have at least some semblance of a cordial adult relationship with him when he was in a decent mood, he was not interested enough to work around that crazy Joanne, work that around crazy Joanne. I will never understand that. Because he doesn't understand love or real emotion. All he understands is his own selfish needs. Although my mother's day piece ended with an angry, happy fucking sentiment, I don't feel that level of hatred toward my dad in ending this piece. I have enjoyed some rare and fleeting quality time with my dad. My dad has a very high IQ and a high level of education, and I have enjoyed some decent, interesting, and friendly interactions with him over the years. My dad has, on a number of occasions, alluded to regret and understanding that he was a bad father. He has never gone so far as to state that he was a bad father and to apologize, but I think that he is aware that he screwed up. Once I was walking with my dad near my parents' house, and I insisted that we walk on the paved road rather than on one of the trails along the road, as I feared rattlesnakes. We were walking on the road about a foot from the edge, and we heard the primal rattle. I never heard a real rattlesnake in real time. My dad was walking a couple paces ahead of me, and I reflectively and instinctively leaped forward into my dad, pushing him into the middle of the road away from the danger. I, like most people, have been told repeatedly to freeze when you hear a rattle, but I had no control over my actions and instinctively leaped forward to shield my dad. He was elderly and had a heart attack 10 years prior, and all that flashed through my mind in a millisecond, and my instinct was to place my body between him and the snake. Luckily, the snake did not strike. The two of us then looked back and saw an enormous rattlesnake just off the road, coiled, rattling, ready to strike. So I know that I do not have love and devotion for my. So I know that I do have love and devotion for my father deep down inside. However, that has only served to make it more painful to finally face the fact that he never had love and devotion for me. You can't make this shit up. Treasure travel. Because he doesn't understand what emotion is. The narcissist doesn't understand what emotion is, because emotion is nothing more than a weapon to the narcissist. That's it. So, I hope that helps. Treasure Travel, thank you so much for everything you do, and another contribution and another story. I really appreciate it. Thank you to everybody watching. Please leave any opinions or advice in the comment section below. And again, if you want your story read on the channel, you have a topic you'd like me to cover, a narcissist you'd like to expose, you'd like to set up Skype, a phone call, or have a private video made, or you'd like to sponsor a video like this for someone who needs help and can't afford it, or just make a contribution to the channel in general to keep it supported, growing, and successful, because this channel survives 100% on contributions from all of you. Without you guys, all this goes away. So if you like what you see here and you want to see more videos like this, you know what to do with the PayPal and email links in the description box. Also, please like and share this video wherever you can. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't, and be sure to click the subscription bell to be notified of all my video uploads. I'm Ollie Matthews. This has been the Narcissistic Resistance.